Okay, I have a feeling this is going to be a very long video, so let's just get into this shit. Okay, so last week I started reading a story called My Dad Told Me to Never Go Into the Basement, and this is a really long story. I'm still getting over my sickness right now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to read as much as I possibly can without feeling like my throat is going to explode, and I'm going to try to record 2 videos, one for Saturday, one for Sunday, so you should be seeing this on Saturday. If you're not, that means something went terribly wrong and I couldn't do it. But I'm honestly just going to get right into the video because this is going to be a long one, and I don't want to lose my voice. I don't want to, waste it on anything. So let's just get started. So this is going to be My Dad Told Me to Never Go Into the Basement, Part 2. I had not seen or heard from my father in over 3 years when his letter arrived. A sickly brown envelope with his distinct looping cursive sprawled on the front with my name on it. There were several stamps in the top right-hand corner making it clear that my dad didn't know where I was living. His one-sentence request on the single sheet of paper contained in the envelope flew in the face of all those nights he would whisper, "Don't go in the basement," as he tucked me in for bed. I could remember lying on the soft sheets, looking up at this man, his face cracked and calloused from hard winds in the fields surrounding our house. He would seem content as he pushed my blanket under my back and around my legs, looking at me with a smile, telling me good night. Then he would stand up, and for but a moment his face would darken, sag with worry and fear. Don't go into the basement. So when my absent father wrote me a letter telling me to meet him there, I ignored it, crumpled it up and tossed it away into the garbage and out of my mind. One more worry in my life could be the one that tears down the dam. Later that day, I was at a friend's house helping him work on some renovations in his kitchen. He was lying on the floor, head up under the sink, trying to dismantle one of the pipes, and he sighed and cursed under his breath. He told me he had forgotten a tool from his workshop and asked me if I could fetch it for him. Without thinking, I said of course I would, and asked him where it was. "It's in the basement." Then he popped his head out and smiled at me. It was an emotionless thing, a crack of his lips and baring teeth like he had spent his whole life reading about what a smile was but had never actually done it before. I stared at him, frozen to the spot. His eyes were looking at me, but I don't think he was actually looking at me. I asked him what was wrong. He just stayed there on the floor, smiling that cold smile and looking at me as if it were nothing. I laughed as if the whole thing was a joke. He simply put his head back under the sink and continued working. Paranoia had taken a hold of me, all because of my dad's letter. It had brought memories back up, things I had repressed long ago under the notion that whatever had happened to me in the basement was a product of an overactive childhood imagination. I turned to open the basement door, which was beside the fridge, and I paused for a moment. I came to the realization that I'd never actually been down into any kind of basement since that night so many years ago. Years of dorm living, shared apartments, and finally the condo I now owned ensured that I hadn't needed to go into a basement. Even my friends' houses or various girlfriends' places, they all seemed to either have no basement or I never had a reason to go down into one. Unconsciously, it seems, I had followed my dad's advice and shaped my life around it. I quickly glanced over at my friend who was still happily and busily working under the sink. I shook my head, tried to forget everything and opened the door. Its hinges were old and in desperate need of oil, protesting by screaming as the door slowly swung open. I looked down into the darkness. The light from the kitchen revealed a few light wooden steps, but the blackness claimed the rest. I flicked the switch for the basement light, but nothing happened. I sighed, cursed, turned to ask my friend where a flashlight was, but saw it first on a shelf beside the light switch. I grabbed it, pressed the power button, a brilliant white light bursting forth in reply. I took a deep breath, counted to 3. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. The stairs groaned beneath my work boots as I went down. The air was dusty and stale, small particles dancing across the beam of my light. I reached the bottom of the stairs and flung my light around the large basement, which turned out to be pretty empty. The stairs themselves were in the middle of the room, and under them were 2 boxes. 2 metal poles were in the middle of the basement, a few feet apart, holding up the floor above them. There was a furnace, a water heater in one corner, and an old bicycle in another. Against the wall to my right, I found his small workbench with tools hanging on the wall above it. I practically ran to the bench and grabbed his toolbox, not particularly caring at this point whether what he wanted was in there. I was only focused on getting out of there as soon as possible. Upstairs in the kitchen, I had laughed at my worry, but here in the darkness, my breathing became labored and shallow as I started to panic. I turned away from the bench and began to head back when the door at the top of the stairs slammed shut, plunging me into almost complete darkness. I didn't even give myself time to be angry at my friend, who was clearly toying with me. He had seen how scared I was, and came to the conclusion that it was the perfect time to joke around with me. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of bare feet slapping against the concrete floor. Someone was running towards me. In that moment, I forgot everything and bolted for the stairs, guided by only the beam of my flashlight. Halfway up the steps, a hand shot out from underneath and grabbed my foot. I fell, hitting my face on the steps. I cried out in pain. Fear and adrenaline shot my body back up and carried me the rest of the way, shoving my body through the door. I stood there in the kitchen for a moment, trying to catch my breath. I turned back towards the basement door, ready to yell at my friend for playing such a cruel joke on me. He was still on the kitchen floor, head buried beneath the sink. I called his name. He popped his head out, saw the terror on my face, and asked what happened. There's someone in the basement. He didn't laugh at me. He didn't question me. He could tell I was scared, that I was serious. He got up and grabbed the flashlight and bolted down the steps before I could stop him. 2 agonizing minutes passed by and the lights came on. He called my name and said it was okay. I slowly went down and saw my friend standing in the middle of the basement. I looked around and knew what he was going to say before he said it. I didn't see a door. I didn't see a window. No one was down there. Unnerved, anxious, paranoid, I became all of these things after that. Weeks went by. I would find myself staring at the trash bin near the desk, unemptied since I had tossed my dad's letter into it. I started sleeping with a light on. First it was the kitchen light, then the one in the hallway. Now I need one in the bedroom. My friend called me one night, said he was worried about me. I hadn't seen him since that day in the kitchen. He asked me to come out with him, grab some drinks. I looked around my place, at the takeout boxes piling up in the kitchen, at the dirty clothes strewn over various pieces of furniture. I had to get out. I got to the bar early. The place was a typical sports pub, complete with an array of brightly lit televisions above the bar, dueling out several different sports events for the drunken patrons sitting on bar stools. I found a more quiet spot at a table for 2 towards the back and sat down. Waited. My friend wasn't always so punctual. After 10 minutes, I grew weary of watching sports and began to study the people around me. The place was fairly busy, sounds of clinking glasses and ambient conversation filling the air. Then, I heard the ring of the bell above the door, felt cool air rush in. The sounds in the bar died. Everyone was staring at the woman who had just walked in, including me. I couldn't stop myself. She was the most frighteningly beautiful woman I'd ever seen. She was incredibly tall, long limbs jutting out of her slender body. Her skin was white, a beacon in the drab darkness of the bar. Her face was almost gaunt. High, sharp cheekbones surrounded abyssal dark eyes. Eyes that were staring right at me. She seemed to float in my direction. I was speechless, unable to find the right words to say to the giant beauty. She sat down on the empty chair right across from me, like it was the most natural thing in the world. She told me to stop staring and buy her a drink, so I did. I bought several more after that. The night itself is a blur now. Flashes of drunken cheering, tense conversations. My friend never showed up. I remember coming to on a bed in a dark place. It wasn't like waking up from a peaceful sleep. It was like being ripped out of a nightmare. My eyes snapped open and I let out a sharp, gasping breath. I couldn't recall where I was or how I got there, but I knew I was in a basement. It's something about the air underground. Something about how you can feel that the earth surrounds you, that the walls are holding back an avalanche of dirt and rock. My eyes were open, but were unable to find any sort of light. I was still lying down on the hard mattress and began to feel around with my hands. My fingers clutched around my cell phone. I turned it on and my eyes screamed out in pain, the blue glow temporarily blinding me. While I tried to adjust to the new light source, I fought hard to remember anything that could help me. The bar, waiting for my friend, a rush of wind, a drop hitting my face, a woman. The woman. I glanced back at my phone where there was an alert telling me that somebody had sent me a message. It was from the woman. Come and find me. I didn't understand until I heard someone cry out in the darkness. Where am I? The voice didn't sound anything like the woman I'd heard last night. It was frail and childlike. Please come find me. I stood up, tried to cry out, but my voice shriveled up and died in the back of my throat. I took my phone and faced it outwards, the dull blue glow illuminating only a meter in front of me. My feet were bare, and I shivered as they took me across the stone floor. I pictured those cave divers as I used to when I was a child. The cold water, the cavernous stone walls closing in. I tried to take deep breaths, but I felt as though my lungs had compressed, forcing me to take shallow and rapid gulps of precious oxygen. You still haven't found me. The shrill voice elongated the E sound at the end of the last word, and it cut at the core of me. I couldn't move my feet, paralyzed with fear. I swung my phone around my body, trying to see anything that could help me. To my right, I saw the shape of stairs, the way out. I rushed towards them, relief flooding through me and drowning any panic I once felt. That's when I bumped into something hard, causing me to fall onto the floor. Drawing my phone out in front of me, I screamed as the light revealed a body hanging from the ceiling. It was the woman from the bar, and she was slowly swinging back and forth from the noose around her neck. She was smiling at me. an impossibly large grin that extended all the way across her face like she had cut her cheeks open. She opened her mouth. "You found me." That's when I passed out. I woke up and daylight was streaming through the small windows. There was no body hanging from the ceiling. I don't remember walking home. I couldn't tell you where the place was, and even if I would never go back. When I got back to my place, I walked to my desk, brought out an envelope and a piece of paper, wrote my dad's name and address on the front of the envelope, and 6 words on the piece of paper. "I'll see you in the basement." I sent a letter to my father to let him know I would meet him in the basement of our old house. I had no other way of contacting him. His address was a mailbox out of a store because he preferred to live off the grid. No cell phone, no landline, no email. I pictured him hunched over a fireplace in a small log cabin deep in the forest. I suppose if I tried really hard I could find him, but my desire to do such a thing had died a long time ago. I figured I had about a week to find my way back to the old place. We had never officially sold it. We had simply moved on, abandoning our ties and the memories that had soaked into the walls. I received many letters from interested house hunters wanting to buy the land, but I had replied to every one of them with my apologies. For a long time, I thought my apprehension was sentimental, some sort of twisted loyalty fueled by nostalgia. These past few weeks have taught me that I was wrong. Fear was and has been dictating my movements for longer than I care to admit. I could not let anybody else go into that basement. Responding to my father awoke something within me. For the first time in a long time, I felt the pang of loneliness that comes with severing a familial connection. It was time to call my brother. I searched for 20 minutes before I realized I'd left my cell phone in the car. I walked out into the hallway and called for the elevator. The hallway was quiet. My apartment building holds about 90 rooms, and my hallway always seemed to be bustling with activity. I glanced at my watch. 4 p.m. Normally a busy time, but today the world had stopped. As I waited for the elevator, I strained to hear something, anything. Loud televisions, the clinking of cutlery against dishware, laughter or yelling matches between neighbors. Not a single sound. I could only hear cables smashing together as they struggled under the weight of the elevator. I felt like the last remaining tree of a forest fire, surrounded by the ashes of my kin as the raging inferno burns hot and bright against a black sky. I shuddered at the vision, trying to breathe deep, to let a calm feeling take hold of me. I was on my 3rd deep breath when the elevator finally chimed its arrival. Suddenly, I didn't want the doors to open. A wave of fear crashed over me, drenching me in anxiety as sweat began to pour forth from my forehead. I was so overwhelmingly afraid that the elevator would open and something would be inside, something that was cast out of my deepest and darkest nightmares so that I may be consumed by it. I saw visions of the woman from the bar, hanging from the rafters and stretching her long lips towards me as she cracked her lips open and smiled at me. I imagined the doors opening and revealing a dark crevice like those found in underwater caves, and it would pull me in like a black hole, squeeze my body until all that remained was the dust from my bones. I closed my eyes when I heard the doors open, breathed in slowly. I exhaled. I waited to hear the sound of the doors closing. All I could hear was the sound of the mechanical hum of the door motor. No. Something else. Whispers. Someone was whispering my name. I screamed in defiance as I opened my eyes, tired of hiding and waiting. Nothing. The elevator was empty. Relief can be so strong sometimes. It was as if I had swallowed all of my fear and it was burning away, consumed by my stomach acid. I laughed. The sound bounced off the walls of the empty hallway and came back to my ears, a former shell of itself. I stepped into the elevator and rode it down to the underground parking garage. The doors opened and I started to make my way to the car. The sound of my shoes hitting the concrete floor echoed in the parking structure. The feeling of unease that I had dispensed upstairs came rushing back. I twisted my head around as I continued walking, but my eyes could not find anybody that was down here with me. Usually the garage is filled with sounds of squealing tires and running engines, the secure beep of a remotely locked car, the echoes of conversations as people arrive home. Tonight was altogether different. The only sounds that filled the stale air were the soles of my leather boots as I put one in front of the other and my increasingly heavy breathing. Then, I heard the sound of a door opening and closing. I whirled around trying to locate the source. I was about 20 paces away from my car, but I froze on the spot, waiting to hear the inevitable sounds of footsteps. None came. I counted to 3, like I used to on the top of the basement stairs waiting for my dad to turn on the light. 1 Mississippi. A sound emitted from somewhere behind me. Not quite footsteps, more like someone dragging their feet behind them. 2 Mississippi. I turned around, but I couldn't see anybody. The shuffling sound quickened. 3 Mississippi. I couldn't stand there any longer. I broke into a sprint for my car, reached the passenger side first, and the shuffling sound grew closer. I fumbled for the key in my pocket, cursing at myself for not having it ready earlier. My fingers clasped over the car key and I tore my hand out in a flash. The shuffling sound sounded like it was right behind me now, but I didn't dare look. I concentrated slowly on getting in the car. I thought if I could do that, somehow I would be safe. I had just put the key into the slot when the shuffling sound stopped. I held my breath. Someone was breathing right behind me. I could feel warm air on the back of my neck. I couldn't move. Then someone talked. "Please help me." The voice sounded strained and frail, like something was wrapped around the throat. I didn't turn around. Instead, I unlocked the door and opened it as quickly as I could. I threw myself into the passenger seat and locked the doors. Only then did I find the courage to turn around. I wish I hadn't. I screamed as I saw the woman from the bar press her face against the passenger window. Her long black hair was sickly and matted, strewn about her pale face. I could only see her mouth, which was cracked wide open. It was like she was trying to chew through the glass. She had a noose around her neck, and she held it up with one arm in the air so that the loop cut into the skin under her jaw. I was frantic. I clumsily climbed into the driver's side and fumbled the keys into the ignition slot. The woman still had her face pressed against the window, her jaw moving up and down as her teeth clanked against the glass. Then, despite the sound of the engine turning over as I twisted the key, and despite the sound of my heartbeat pounding against the inside of my skull, I heard her talk again. "I told you not to come down here." She practically screamed it. Her voice seemed to drill through the window and penetrate my ears. I screamed. Then my foot pressed down on the gas pedal, and I was out of there. 10 minutes later, I pulled onto the side of the road and called my brother. He picked up after 3 rings. I hadn't spoken to my brother in 10 years. The formalities would come later. "We have to meet," was all I said. Silence on the other end, at first. I could almost hear his brain turning. "Okay," was all he said. I couldn't figure out if I was pleased or anxious about his reply. My apprehension would have to be quelled for the moment. Time, I felt, was not on my side. Whatever was happening was escalating. I remember the time I was rafting down a river, the way the current seemed to hold still, the way the sounds of the surrounding forest seemed to be smothered by something ancient and powerful. The waterfall, drifting towards the edge in a rubber raft, helpless against the force of nature's fury. I was there now, on the precipice. I only hoped my brother could throw me a lifeline. I met him in a park. The sun had just hidden behind the horizon and the night had taken over the sky, a sliver of bright orange, the only remnant of the burning day. I stood up from a park bench and walked over to meet him. Older, but slightly shorter, my brother was my physical equal in every way but height. We had the same eyes, the same furrowed brow. I could see in his face the weight of years upon years of silence between us. He was weathered, burdened by responsibilities of a wife and child who depended on him. I had never met my nephew. He stopped just short of me, sizing me up as I had done. His face betrayed little emotion. "My brother," he said, and came to me with arms wide open. We embraced, and I felt like crying. The dam was splitting and cracking. I skipped the small talk. There was still a clock in my head that was counting down, but to what? I didn't know. Dad wrote to me. He wants to meet. I looked at him as I said it, searching for a reaction. For the slightest of moments, his eyes lit up and he smiled. It was gone as soon as it had arrived. His face darkened and his eyes sagged. "There's nothing in this. Nothing for you and nothing for me. He wants us to go into the basement." He sighed. It was a heavy thing, breath spilling from his mouth and draining him. He was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke. "I need to tell you a story." I stood there, looking at him. He took this as a sign that he could continue. "After you moved out of the house, I got a letter from someone I used to know in high school. She still lives in our hometown, saddled with an overweight husband and a delinquent child. She was writing to tell me of an incident that involved our abandoned house. The kids there treat it like a local haunted spot, where only the bravest enter. If you can be inside for an hour, you earn your stripes, so to speak. Her son was inside killing time by exploring when he discovered the entrance to the basement. Thinking that something from down there would give him the ultimate credibility, he went searching. It was here that he paused, swaying back and forth on the balls of his feet as if momentum would push the words out. After the hour had passed, the other children called out for him, but nobody came out of the house. They were too scared to go in themselves, so they called his mom. She came in a hurry and was sprinting into the house as soon as her car had stopped rolling. Then came screams. First from her, then the children. She came out of the house carrying her child. Only he wasn't a child any longer. His skin was shriveled and dry like leather left out in the heat. His eyes were completely white and his hair was falling out in matted clumps. He muttered something under his breath, stuck in a trance. My brother took something out of his pocket, a piece of paper, what I could only assume to be the original letter. He continued. His mother wrote down what he said. I saw a man. We were on a cliff, and he was looking over the edge. He turned to me and smiled, and the world began to crumble. The rock beneath our feet collapsed in on itself and swallowed the man. The whole cliff was shaking and groaning. I could hear the man screaming as he fell into the abyss. Arms tore out from underneath me. They grabbed my feet and pulled me into the earth. I tried to scream, but dirt fell into my mouth and filled my throat. I fell for eternity. I landed on the edge of a cliff, stood up, and looked over the edge. I smiled. Then he died, right then and there in her arms. He folded the paper and put it back into his pocket and looked at me. She asked me to burn the place down, so I did. I burnt it to the ground. I killed the house that killed our father. I am 9 years old. It's the second time my dad whispered to me before shutting my bedroom door. Don't go into the basement. It's the middle of the night, and I'm ripped out of sleep, and the first thing I notice is the absolute silence. Our house is old, built hundreds of years ago by the hands of my ancestors. On any given night, the air is filled with the snapping and creaking of wood, the scuttles of animals on the roof, the banging of metal vents as they struggle against the cold winter air that seeps in. On this night, there are no such sounds. I can only hear the sound of my own breathing. My eyes have difficulty adjusting to the almost suffocating darkness that surrounds me. We live in the country, half a mile from the main road, with thick evergreens shielding us from the streetlight pollution. So darkness is something I'm used to. But this night, it's different. The silence is unnerving. Something in the air feels off. A growing sense of unease tugs at my insides. I throw off my blanket and a frigid breeze crawls under my skin. I pause, try to remember what woke me up. A sound. It was a whisper. Someone whispered into my ear. Come into the basement. Did I dream it? Is my mind playing tricks on me? Whisked into a turbulent tornado of fear and doubt? I strain to hear any noise, strain to see the outline of my dresser or my door frame. I swing my legs off the bed and put my feet to the floor. Like everything else, the wood beneath me is cold to the touch. I feel my way to the door, hands outstretched in the darkness. I enter the hallway and stand there transfixed by the utter loneliness I feel in that moment. I'm an astronaut, floating in the darkness of space. Though my brother and parents sleep down the hallway, I hear nothing. No breathing, no groans of bed frames as the bodies on top twist and turn. Where is everyone? I reach the door to my brother's room only to find that it's locked. I knock faintly on the wood, but there's no response. I step back and make my way to my parents' room. Their door's also locked. And again, there's no response that comes from my knocking. I want to call out, but something's holding me back. The way the silence is swimming around me brings a shiver up my spine. I am prey, hunted by an unseen force. I dare not make any noise. I slowly shuffle towards the stairs, feeling along the wall with my hands because the darkness is so complete that my eyes might as well be closed. The texture changes as my hand comes off the wall and touches the wood railing of the staircase. Before I put my foot out to step down, I hear something other than my own breath for the first time since I had woken up. Someone is whispering. I hold my breath so I can try and figure out who is talking, but the words are unintelligible. They sound like bursts of wind as they blow across the blades of grass in the fields around our home. Someone repeating the same thing over and over again. I cannot tell from exactly where it's coming from. Down the stairs somewhere, but from which room, I don't know. Then, in a sudden rush, the whispering seems to come at me. I hear footsteps running up the stairs. No, not running. Sprinting. I see no one, only feel them. Then I hear the creak of a floorboard. Someone is right beside me. Breathing. A whisper. Come find me. I scream, flail my arms around, but all they find is empty air. Instinct takes over and I'm running down the stairs, taking them two at a time despite the fact that I'm blind in the darkness. I hit the landing with a dull thud and my momentum carries me into a wall. I stop there, frozen in time, waiting to hear the sound of footsteps pursuing me. Silence again. My heartbeat is racing, pounding inside my skull. Suddenly my eyes catch on to something, a faint white light that streams in front of our window. I walk towards it and find that the clouds have parted, revealing a half moon in the night sky. A glimmer of hope ripples inside me. The light is comforting and I bask in its glow. But the moment is short-lived. My head whips around, drawn by a new sound. something twisting back and forth. At first, I think it's our porch swing swaying in the wind, but as I glance back out the window, I see the swing is as dead as the house seems to be. I try to locate the sound. Only when I'm in the living room do I realize where the sound is coming from, where I should have guessed that I would have to go from the moment I woke up. Something is making noise in the basement. Or someone. It must be my dad. My mom never goes down there. No one in our family does except for my father. Maybe he whispers to everyone before he closes their bedroom door, "Don't go into the basement." All in a moment, my fear is fought down by curiosity, by anger. Why can't I go down there? What's in the basement? I stride confidently towards the top of the basement stairs, look down into the abyss. My breath catches. My mother and brother are standing at the bottom of the stairs, their back towards me. They're standing so still and so quiet. I cry out to them, but they remain there, facing into the blackness of the basement. The noise is getting louder. It sounds like a dead branch groaning in a storm. I summon the courage and put one foot in front of the other. With each step, I feel a coldness, not from the air, but inside of me. It is the fear that was born out of the original darkness, when the first of us to walk the earth stared into the cave and nightmares spring forth. I land on the last step, and I'm about to reach out for my mother's shoulders when I see something that makes me stop. It is a sliver of pale moonlight that has crawled down the stairs and pierced the darkness of the basement, revealing a shape. A pair of legs. 2 feet. My dad's feet. I flip the light switch beside me, and the first thing I see is my father, smiling at me. It's unnatural, a cracked, wide grin that seems to stretch from ear to ear. Then I see the rope, digging into the flesh of his neck, stretching his mouth into a grimace. His eyes are open, boring into mine. Before I scream, he speaks to me. "You found me." I remember this in the park, sitting on a bench as my brother tells me what I never wanted to relive. He can tell from my face that I now know the truth that I'd repressed for so long. "We found you, lying on the floor underneath his feet. Your face, I'll never forget it. Wide-eyed and gaunt, you looked like a skeleton. Mom and I couldn't get you to move. Only when the paramedics came and removed his body did you make any sort of movement. We carried you out of there, but I don't think you ever really left that basement." I'm silent, unable to form any words for the moment. I'm recalling all the things I know, the memories that I know are false, the letters from my father, the memory of him carrying me out of the basement after the power outage, all those nights I thought he was tucking me in and whispering to me. I looked at my brother, and he can see in my eyes I needed more. "You were different afterwards," which was to be expected. Even years later, when you started acting like a human being again, I could tell you weren't really there. Mom and I tried to keep going, but she couldn't handle being at the house. None of us could. But no one would buy the property. Everybody knew what happened there. Eventually, Mom just left us. One day she was there, the next she was gone with a note saying she was sorry and that I should look after you. I tried. I really did, but you were a shell. A walking skin suit that only looked like my little brother. He sighed, the years of guilt and shame expelling out of him. I don't blame him, though. I remember him getting into college. We argued for weeks, him refusing to leave me and me refusing to let him stay. In the end, I drove him out, cut him out of my life. I had the house, I had my father. Why would I need anything else? My thoughts are interrupted when he starts to speak again. "You called me the day you moved out of that house. Told me Dad said you were leaving. I knew then, truly and deeply, how broken your mind was. I struggled for a long time on how to help you. Then I came to the realization that if you thought Dad was alive, if you didn't remember finding him hanging, that maybe you were better off. I kept tabs, making sure you were living a normal life. I waited in the hopes that you would reach out to me, praying that you were finally ready to accept what happened. I can't tell you how happy I was when you called me little brother." He sat with me, his hand on my shoulder, looking into my hopeful eyes. I stared back at him and asked him a question. "What did you mean when you said the house that killed our father? Why did you say that?" For a moment, a shroud of darkness spills over his face, his brow furrowed. He looks around us as if he's afraid somebody may be listening. He leans towards me and whispers into my ear, "Don't go into the basement." We look at each other and I know that I wasn't the only one Dad was whispering to in the dark. My brother nodded at me, a mutual understanding passing between us. He goes on. He did that for weeks before it happened, stood in my doorway whispering. He was obsessed with that basement. I would catch him standing at the bottom of the staircase, looking into the darkness. I would call out to him, but it's as if nothing else existed. Sometimes I would come home from school and I would hear him working away at something down there. I never did find out what he was doing, but whatever it was, I know it killed him. I know it in my gut. I stopped trying to figure it out though. What's the point now? The house is gone, Dad's gone. What else is there? I suspect he isn't really asking me these questions, but instead he's asking himself. But I can't answer him anyways. My mind is too distracted, too full of things I don't understand yet. There is one thing I know for sure. I know my brother doesn't remember the night Dad died. I trust my memory of that night. I trust myself that I really did see him and my mother standing at the bottom of the stairs. I trust this because there's something else I remember about that night. Something I refuse to believe until this moment. And as I sit there on the park bench, holding my brother as he weeps for the family we lost that night, I know my work had just begun. I know that burning the house is just the beginning, because I remember seeing a woman standing beside my father and holding the other end of the rope that took his life. Okay, I need to read the rest of the story right now, but I actually can't. I have been struggling so hard, basically screaming, trying to clear my throat this whole fucking video. So that was parts 2, 3, and 4. Jesus fucking Christ. This is so well written and just such an, I don't understand. I say it all the time. I don't understand how people do this. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you guys have any other, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on out there. Can you just, I need 2 seconds. No? Okay, that's awesome. That's great. At least I finished the story. What the fuck is happening? In the middle of this video too, I literally stopped reading and I was like, okay, I guess this is the end, because they were hosting some event for little kids out there and they were screaming just right underneath my window. What was I saying? I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any other stories that you want me to read, go ahead and send them to me. I always have my social media link down below, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye. Frozen to the spot. Siri, every kid who's ever lived in this apartment complex is literally outside my window right now. Apparently they're hosting some fucking event right outside of my window. You can hear the kids screaming. They're literally right there too. Awesome.